Hello, today we will be talking about sustainable cities and communities. Cities are often viewed as the engine of growth and the key to economic success for nations. The view of the city as a primary source of pollution produced an environmental movement primarily focused on the greening of the city. So what is a sustainable city? Neither experts nor the dictionary have yet defined what a sustainable city is. However, the general consensus is that it is a city that minimizes the inputs and outputs, meaning sustainable cities are cities designed with consideration for social, economic, environmental impact, and resilient habitat for existing populations, without compromising the ability of future generations to experience the same. These cities are inhabited by people who are dedicated towards minimization of required inputs of energy, water, food, waste, and output of heat, air pollution, methane, and water pollution. This idea leads to a great deal of variation in terms of how cities carry out their attempts to become sustainable. The way the cities can achieve the goals for being sustainable is to be able to feed itself with the surrounding natural environment and have the ability to power itself with renewable sources of energy. The idea is that these contributions will lead to a decrease of the city's impact on climate change. The Adelaide City Council states that socially sustainable cities should be equitable, diverse, connected, democratic, and provide a good quality of life. Now let's talk about the history. The Eco-City concept was formed by a nonprofit organization called Urban Ecology back in 1975. They were focused on rebuilding cities in balance with nature. The first international conference regarding eco-cities was in 1990, and since then there have been 5 more conferences, with the most recent one being in 2006. With developing countries that are rapidly expanding and urbanizing, the UN has agreed that both new and existing cities will need to plan their cities in a more sustainable way. The first publication of sustainable human settlements was in 1987, when our Common Future was published. It stated that sustainable development should be the guiding principle for governments on both local and national levels. Now, after various meetings, the UN had established in 1992 that global issues should be undertaken at local levels. From there, the United Nations Environmental Program and the Sustainable Cities Program was established to increase urban environmental planning and management. In 1996, at the second UN Habitat Conference, the first principles for sustainable human settlements were established. Now, this is all easier said than done. One of the most important problems for sustainable development during this century is dealing with demographic, environmental, economic, and social transitions that will move cities to sustainable ones. Urban environments traditionally suffer from main physical environmental problems, such as increased air pollution and intensively polluted rivers, and there are well-documented examples. However, one of the most important environmental challenges worldwide is climate change. Climate change will complicate access to water, it will create coastal flooding, and there will be many more consequential problems in the later years. Moreover, the poorest countries and their inhabitants will suffer the most as they have the fewest resources to be able to combat this problem. As said before, rapid urban growth, environmental pressures, and economic decline will have the most significant social consequences. For all these reasons, managing urban environment in this context is probably one of the most important and difficult tasks for the coming decades. There is currently no real strategy that can universally be applied. However, a recent UN Habitat report indicates a set of responses to these challenges. We'll talk about that in our slides coming up.
This section refers to how the Sustainable Development Goal is measured. Here the UN states that the future we want involves cities of all opportunities with access to basic needs, so basic services, energy, housing, transportation, and more. And this goal is the basis of the targets, and in addition to this, the indicators which act as a measure. In total, there are 10 indicators as well as 15 There are 10 targets as well as 15 indicators. The first target is for safe and affordable housing. By 2030, the aim is to have access for all to safe housing with basic services, and for this to be done, slums will also need to be upgraded. A slum here being defined as a group living under the same roof without some of the following, such as improved water, sanitation, durability of housing. And in order to measure this, we look at the proportion of urban population living in slums or inadequate housing. This graph here shows the share of urban population living in slums in 2014, which is the latest data available from the UN Habitat. As you can see, in the higher percentages rest in Africa, with South Sudan being the highest. The second target is accessible and sustainable transport systems. The aim here is to provide safe and accessible transport, improve road safety, and have transport available to all in vulnerable situations. The indicator here is the proportion of population that has convenient access to public transport by sex, age, person, and persons with disabilities. The third target for the Sustainable Development Goal is the inclusive and sustainable urbanization. So the goal here is stated as by 2030, wants to enhance inclusive and sustainable urbanization and capacity for participatory, integrated, and sustainable human settlement planning and management in all countries. And there's two indicators for this, which first being in relation to the sustainable urbanization rates, which is the ratio of land consumption rate to the population growth rate. And the next other measurement being the proportion of cities with direct participation structure of civil society in urban planning and management that operates regularly and democratically. The next target is to protect the world's cultural and natural heritage. And the measurements here is the total expenditure, both public and private, per capita spent on the preservation, protection, and conservation of all cultural and natural heritage. So this includes the type of heritage, the level of government, the type of expenditure, as well as the type of private funding. The next goal is to reduce the effect of natural disasters. So the target here is to reduce the number of deaths and decrease the direct economic losses related to these natural disasters, as well as protect the poor and the people in vulnerable situations. There are two indicators here, and the first being the deaths and injuries from natural disasters. So here we look at the number of deaths, missing persons, affected people per 100,000 population. So this is measured the mortality rates, internal displaced people, as well internally displaced people. So groups of people who have been forced to flee and have not crossed the international border. The next measurement is relating to the economic losses from natural disasters. So the direct disaster economic loss in relation to the global GDP. And here we have the graphs addressing the indicators and the measurements. So we have the death rate from natural disasters, and here it's showing the 4 different countries as well as the world, and you can see that the highest one was from 1991, and it was Bangladesh. The next graph is for the internally displaced people from natural disasters, and here it is seen that the country with the highest amount of these cases is China itself. The second indicator here, it has the graphs following the direct disaster economic losses share of GDP, which has practically no data at all. And then the next one showed the global disaster losses as a share of GDP. And this is looking at the world. And the last graph addressing this is the global economic losses from disasters as a share of GDP, and here it looks at 2 sources of economic loss data, the Munich Re as well as the Aon Benfield. And whilst doing this, is comparing the total disaster losses and also looking solely at the weather-related disasters. And here it ranges from 1990 to 2017, and in 2011 you look at the total disaster losses based on the A in Benfield, which was surpassed the 0.5%, and it shows the Munich Re is slightly below at around just below 0.5%, and the weather-related disaster losses based on the A in Benfield is just above 0.2%.
The next is about air pollution. The target is that by 2030, reduce adverse per capita environmental impacts of cities, including by paying special attention to air quality and municipal and other waste management. There are two indicators. The first is that proportion of urban solid waste regularly collected and with adequate final discharge out of total urban solid waste generated by cities. It is defined as a proportion of solid waste collected and managed in control facilities out of municipal solid waste generated. The second is that annual mean levels of fine particulate matter in cities. So this graph is the example of indicator 2. The graph is about annual mean levels of PM2.5 in US cities. The source is SDG's website, and the x-axis shows the time period from 2000 to 2016. The y-axis shows the level of PM2.5. As we can see from this graph, the graph is on the decline. The seventh is about easy access to public space for everyone. The target is that by 2030, provide universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces, in particular for women and children, older persons, and persons with disabilities. There are two indicators. The first is that average share of the built-up area of cities that open space for public use for all. And the second is that proportion of persons victim of physical or sexual harassment. So the next is about support positive economic. The target is support positive economic, social, and environmental links between urban, peri-urban, and rural areas by strengthening national and regional development planning. The indicator is that proportion of population living in cities that implement urban and regional development plans, integrating population projection and resource needs by size of city. The next is about disaster risk management. By 2020, substantially increased the number of cities and human settlements adopting and implementing integrated policies and plans toward inclusion, resource efficiency, and so on, and develop and implement in line with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030, holistic disaster risk management at all levels. There are two indicators. The first is the number of countries that adopt and implement national disaster risk reduction strategy in line with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030. The second is that proportion of local governments that adopt and implement to local disaster risk reduction strategies in line with national disaster risk reduction strategies. So this map shows the share of local governments that adopt and implement local disaster risk reduction strategies in 2018. Many countries don't have data, but especially Japan, Afghanistan, and Mexico have a high percentage of share. The final is about for sustainable building. The target is to support least developed countries, including through financial technical assistance, in building sustainable and resilient buildings utilizing local materials. The indicator is that proportion of financial support to the least developed countries that is allocated to the construction and retrofitting of sustainable, resilient, and resource-efficient buildings utilizing local materialism.
What progress has been made? More than half the world's population live in cities. By 2030, it is projected that 6 out of 10 people will be urban dwellers. That's why countries need to make national urban policies to prevent people from living in slums, to manage waste in a sustainable way, and to reduce urban air pollution levels. As of 2014, 30% of the urban population live in slums. That's around 880 million people. And the air pollution levels were at least 2.5 times higher than the maximum standards set by the World Health Organization. That's why, as of 2015, 142 countries had a national urban policy in place or under development, and those countries are home to 75% of the world's urban population. As the world is experiencing unprecedented urban growth, rapid urbanization has trouble. It has brought enormous challenges, including growing numbers of slum dwellers, increased air pollution, inadequate basic services and infrastructure, and unplanned urban sprawl, which also makes cities more vulnerable to disasters. Better urban planning and management are needed to make the world's urban spaces more inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. As of May 2017, 149 countries were developing national-level urban policies. Many cities around the world are facing acute challenges in managing rapid urbanization. Between 2000 and 2014, the number of people living in slums increased from 807 million to 883 million. And based on data collected from 214 cities, about 3/4 of municipal solid waste generated is collected. In 2016, 91% of the urban population worldwide were breathing air that did not meet the World Health Organization air quality guidelines value for particulate matter. More than half were exposed to air pollution levels at least 2 times higher than the safety standard. And in 2016, an estimated of 4.2 million people died as a result of high levels of ambient air pollution. From 1990 to 2013, almost 90% of deaths attributed to international reported disasters occurred in low and middle income countries. Reported damage to housing attributed to these disasters shows statistically significant rise from 1990 onwards. That's why countries need to make national urban policies to take these problems into account and try and reduce them. Globally, urban areas are expanding at a faster rate than their populations. Between 2000 and 2014, areas occupied by cities grew 1.28 times faster than their populations. Closely related to this trend is that the urban densities of cities have been declining, creating profound repercussions for environmental sustainability at the local, regional, and global scale. Better management of urban growth will be crucial in order to guarantee sustainable urbanization. National urban policies are strategies that specifically respond to the urbanization challenges of today. As of the beginning of 2019, 150 countries have developed such policies, and almost half are already implementing them.
So what's next regarding sustainable cities and communities? It is expected that by 2050 there will be an increase regarding urban population. It is expected that the leap will be about from 4.2 billion people to 6.5 billion people. Then 9 out of 10 megacities will be located in the developing world,
which it is expected that countries that are considered as developing right now, it is expected that they will have in their hands mega cities in the future. And then, of course, migration has always been a problem, and it's not going to stop being a problem in the future. It is expected that it will be worse, and that it will take a huge increase. So various professionals at the architectural and urban planning from Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill were asked, how would the future city look like? How would a developed future city look like? So they broke it down in several characteristics and several areas where they can help the environment and help the people have a better life. So regarding ecology, they will have protection, and everything will be designed around natural features, and they will provide protection to the ecosystem, protection to the wildlife habitat. The ecology will be a huge factor in the future. It is now, but it will be even bigger in the future. Regarding water, future cities will help clean the water and recycle rainwater and guarantee good water quality to the people.